Awesome. Well, welcome to another episode of Advertising Alpha. Today we have Erika, who is the CEO and founder of Prosana, which is a recruitment agency specializing in helping e-commerce agencies and direct-to-consumer brands build top-performing teams. And I think, too, you also help out with building out lean processes, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Hi, everyone listening.
Well, it's great to have you here. So I guess the first question I want to ask is, uh, why is it so difficult to hire media buyers? And this is something we've struggled with a lot. And I think there's a decent amount of ignorance in the space around what is a good media buyer. And it's really hard to kind of parse through people's experience and really identify if they're good or not. And so I was just wondering, why is that an issue? Why is it so difficult? And what have you found?
Yeah, I actually want to correct this, not correct it, but I want to actually expand it a little bit because I always say it's not just good media buyers that are hard to be found, but any person, like any kind of candidate that's good is very hard to hire. Like there's not that many great people out there. So to find the true gem, it takes time. So when it comes to media buyers, the same rule applies. In my opinion, at some point, I would say probably like 4 or 5 years ago, especially maybe during COVID when e-commerce boomed, a lot of people changed their career and became media buyers. So right now you have a lot of, as I call, a bit of noise in this space. So when it comes to finding a true gem, it's just difficult because you have a lot of people that are not as qualified as you would like them to be. So I would say this is probably the main thing, that there are just too many of them. And then when it comes to finding the right one, yeah, you just have to really dig deep. So I would say this would be the explanation.
And on that too, with let's say the noise where a lot of people have just started really media buying,
Yeah.
what are you kind of looking for to see if that's the case? I mean, the way I see it is they have a couple certifications
Yeah.
and that's kind of it, but it's like they don't actually have that true hardcore experience, maybe scaling up a brand or really having to figure out how to optimize campaigns. Instead, they just kind of know the basics of like how to navigate the Facebook ads platform and Google ads platform. They
Yeah.
don't really know what it takes to truly drive performance.
Yeah, this is actually very true. And the funny part is that they usually call themselves senior media buyers when in reality they don't have the practical experience. I mean, you cannot blame them. Well, you have to start somewhere. Maybe just lowering the bar and lowering your expectations would be a wise move for them. But well, there's a huge demand for good media buyers, and they know that there is demand. With just a few certifications, as you say, they apply for roles that are way outside their skills range. But I guess, as I said, the demand is huge. The supply is not, like, the supply is also now big, to be honest. Like that's what we discussed at the start. So I guess at some point it's gonna be better, and mainly because and you know that, and I think you talk about it on LinkedIn, that media buying has changed significantly. It's like you cannot just be analytical and that's it. You also have to be creative. You have to think outside the box. And there's just more needed in order to be a great media buyer. So I think at some point, a lot of those, let's say, young media buyers will just go away, and they will change maybe their career, or they will gain experience. But until then, we just have to, from the recruitment side, we have to suffer a little bit.
Yeah. And I guess with that too, the main thing I'm kind of looking for is their experience with the types of brands they've worked with and then the
Yeah.
scale of those campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I've seen is I'll look at a media buyer's resume and they're like managing, 7-figure monthly budgets. And you're like, wow, that's great. It's really high scale. They're managing millions of dollars a month, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of dig into it a little bit and it's like, well, they've kind of ran branded campaigns for like maybe a bigger, Fortune 500 company.
Yeah.
And they're effectively just setting up the campaigns and letting it run,
Yeah.
but they're not actually doing anything to figure out how to drive better performance.
Yeah.
And I think that requires a lot more critical thinking and basically experience doing that.
Yeah.
And so that's for me is kind of a red flag a little bit. It's, even though they have this great experience in terms of the volume of spend they're managing, they
Yeah.
don't actually know too much in terms of what they're actually doing. Instead, it's just like, let me just set up the campaigns. If I've set up the campaigns, I'm good.
To be honest, I want to add to this. One thing we've learned with recruiting media buyers is that you have to ask very specific questions to get the answer that you're looking for. Because if you ask, like, what's the usual budget that you manage, they will tell you like 7 figures. But sometimes it's not for one brand, it's for like 7 different brands. And they just,
Yeah.
put a sum of all of those ad spends into one. So when we ask questions in the applications, we always say, what's the maximum or what's the usual budget you manage for one e-commerce D2C brand per month? And that month wasn't Black Friday, for example, like Black Friday month, not in November. So you have to be very, very specific about how you ask questions, because as you said, branding campaigns also are not applicable, or working with Fortune 500 companies are not applicable, because you're looking for someone who's working with startup-y D2C e-commerce brands, right? So you need to probably ask the question differently then. It's tricky. People are, you cannot blame them. That's how they understand the question. And that's also how they are able to present themselves better.
Right. And one thing too, I was actually talking to a friend about this a couple of days ago, but he said, and I will kind of get into this in a bit, but the challenge you have when you're going out and you're sourcing people, or you're trying to find people that you think might be good, the issue kind of running into is the biggest qualifier you're actually identifying is how good that person is at presenting themselves, right? It doesn't mean they're actually good. It just means that they can present a really good kind of picture of who they are and what they've done. And it might look really good, at its face. Like you see, it's like, oh, this great experience, this great looking LinkedIn profile, or maybe they have a really good Upwork profile. But that just means they're really good at marketing themselves. It doesn't necessarily mean they're good at the actual work. And sometimes the people that are good at the actual work, they have a pretty, forward-looking LinkedIn. They don't really have any other stuff they're kind of using to market themselves. So it's kind of hard to go find those hidden gems too, right?
Yeah, it is hard. I remember one of the media buyers that I hired, I don't even know how many, like 4 years ago. The guy was, I hope he's not going to be listening, because we're good friends right now. But he was so shy. He was not great at presenting himself. But one thing he said that stood out to me, he said, basically, his career change was very interesting for me. He was supposed to be a surgeon. He was on a track to become a surgeon. He just took a gap year and he decided to start media buying. And then years passed by and he ended up being a media buyer. So for me, it signaled that the person is really hardworking and he's not afraid of challenges, because to even consider such career as surgeon, I think you have to be very good with stressful environments, and you have to put in a lot of work in the first place to just graduate from med school. So I hired him, and he turned out to be one of the best media buyers we've ever had in the agency. So I think whenever it comes to really identifying which people are actually good, you have to ask the right questions. So, pick those 3 to 5 questions that you're always going to ask that will allow you to identify whether or not the person is good. And of course, sometimes you'll make mistakes because you're working with people, and people are smart. They know how to present themselves in the best possible light. So again, when asking questions, be very specific so they answer the questions right. And then also make sure to have practical tests, because that will show you how good they are in practice.
Awesome. Yeah. And so I guess that kind of leads into my next question, but in this interview process, what skills and behaviors are you qualifying for when you're hiring one of these media buyers?
Yeah. So when it comes to skills, I guess it very much depends on the company we're hiring for. Usually, actually, for a very long time, media buyers were doing tests where we would ask them, present them a hypothetical scenario, and I would ask them to show how they would approach it. Right now, majority of the clients choose to do live audits. So they give access to the ad account. It can be a day before, it can be an hour before the call. So the candidate can review the performance, and then on the call, they give suggestions how things could be improved, or what they think, is the biggest bottleneck in the performance. So I guess that a lot depends on the brand or the agency that we're recruiting for. And then when it comes to behavior and soft skills, analytical, 100%, attentive to detail, 200%, because you have to be very attentive to detail, and also very responsible not to miss anything, and be on top of things, but also be creative. So we always ask questions around research, around creatives, and what kind of input they provide when it comes to creative creative research, creative production, and so on. So I guess those skills are like must have these days.
Yeah. I want to go back to what you mentioned about that media buyer hired that was training to be a surgeon, because I found that too, where what I try to look for is somebody who was pursuing a really difficult career
Mm,
and ultimately decided, hey, this is not for me. And then
mm-hmm.
in the process of kind of finding what they want to do next, they stumbled into media buying.
Yeah,
And I found that's just a great thing to look for because,
I agree.
I'll say in contrast to the other situation where, and this is going to sound bad, but let's say somebody was a marketing major in college and they
Mm-hmm.
always want to do like advertising. I found those people aren't always so good. Like what you want to find is somebody that was trying to, get to here in terms of their career and they landed in media buying and then they really excelled. But for
Yeah.
someone whose like aspiration maybe was to be in marketing, I just found they don't quite have the kind of grit, determination, and analytical ability that some of these other people might have.
Yeah, but also, I kind of joke here a bit. I think the marketing before was very different. The marketing these days, especially in the industry we are in, is very unique. I don't think they teach about it in universities as much as, we would like to. So whenever they graduate from a marketing course, I think their understanding of marketing is different. Yes, maybe the principles stay, like direct response and branding and all of that, but I think it's still very different. And then talking about the careers, I actually had a client, I don't even know, like 5 years ago, an agency that we worked with, they only hired the media buyers that came from engineering background.
Hmm.
And they were
Yeah.
100% convinced that engineers make great media buyers. And actually, that was true. They had quite a few great media buyers coming from engineering background.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another thing I've kind of looked for is people that just have some strong critical thinking experience. And the interesting thing with that is, at least in the US, like looking at people's college majors.
Yeah.
So obviously anyone that has a bachelor of science degree, so, anything
Mm,
that's kind of more quant math focused. But then the other side, the other more humanities focused major that I found, smart critical thinkers is someone who's maybe a philosophy major because
good.
philosophy is
Yeah.
difficult too. And I do feel like with media buying, it requires so much critical thinking and thinking outside the box and also thinking across a bunch of different kind of categories, right? To your point, it's a creative side. It's a deep
Mhm.
dive in analytics of the platforms. It's also to just having the ability to navigate the complexity of some of these platforms sometimes. If you're like
Yeah.
troubleshooting a pixel or you're trying to connect a third-party software
Mhm.
to what you're doing, it just requires thinking in very different ways.
I
So
agree.
people who are really good at critical thinking generally do well here. And then also to people who are just gritty, right? Like they can just push through and solve problems, right?
Problem solvers. I actually wanted to add this as well in the list. I think it's actually very sad because not many people these days are problem solvers. And then when the challenge comes, they actually just rely on you to give them a recommendation or a solution. And sometimes, which is even sadder, they just ignore the problem or they don't even see it, which I think the critical thinking comes into place. No critical thinking. So when the problem comes, they don't even see it. So yeah, problem solving, I think, yeah, is another important trait I would add.
Yeah. With problem solving too, I think it's like having that sense of
Mm,
where you really just need to, I'm trying to think of the word, it's you have a sense of closure, like just like getting something across the finish line too. A lot of
yeah,
times people, when they kind of hit that friction with trying to solve a problem or get something done, they kind of like give up and they're like,
yeah,
I need help or I need someone else to do this.
mhm,
Or it's like, this is outside the normal kind of checklist of things I need to be doing.
yeah,
But someone that has that drive for closure that will, basically complete that task and make sure it gets done. That's also something I found is super important.
yeah. To be honest, I actually think when recruiting media buyers, creative strategists, literally any kind of role that is needed in an agency or an e-commerce brand, and I'm talking from my perspective because that's the two industries we work with, I would say the first thing that you have to do is define what kind of ideal players you're looking for, what qualities they
Yeah.
have. And then I think on top of that, you add certain characteristics that are needed for that particular role. Because In my opinion, if you're running a startup, an agency, or again, an e-commerce, the people overall that you need, they have to be problem solvers. They have to have good critical thinking. They have to be proactive and also attentive to details. Like, I think also being not attentive to details is a big problem these days as well with all the AI and all the support that we have with technology. But I would say that like you have to define what kind of people overall you're looking for, and then you just add additional traits to the mix depending on the role that you're hiring for.
One thing on the behavior side, I'm curious your thoughts on this, but
Mm.
I found good media buyers are kind of two buckets of people. One
Mhm.
is they're the more like engineer type philosophy and how
Yeah.
they approach things. Very specific. They have somewhat linear thinking in a lot of what they do, but it's effective.
Yeah.
And they, are heavily like data focused.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of see things as this discrete, like methodical approach in how they're going to
Yeah.
scale their campaigns. But the other side are like poker
Creative.
players. The creative too, but it's like for me too, it's like this kind of poker player analogy where it's not
Mhm.
gambling, it's
Yeah.
poker where you do have like, poker has, I mean, there's skill in poker, right? And there's also a lot of statistics in it that make you successful. And so the way those media buyers think is they think in bet, right? They're like, I'm going to
Mhm.
try this out. I think it has a pretty high likelihood of succeeding. And they constantly are just trying out new bets. And I found they too are pretty obsessive compulsive in how they manage campaigns.
Yeah.
Just like maybe a gambler, they're constantly refreshing the ad accounts, and if CPAs are getting better, it's a rush for it, right?
Yeah.
I was curious too. Have you kind of seen that when you're talking to media buyers?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I've seen that as well. I think I mean, I would probably add this creative media buyer there too, who's like,
But yeah,
maybe this is a person who's coming more from like philosophy background. Usually those people are more like thinking in depth about the creatives that could work and so
hmm
on. But I actually do see that there are certain people that are more analytical. They are more steady in their performance, and then the accounts are more steady in the performance. And then there are those gamblers, as you say, who are like very impulsive in a way, and they are like just playing high risk. And I actually think, well, it depends on the client. Some clients may like that because with big risk, big reward can come. But then if you're doing things steady, maybe you can have a steady growth. So I think it really depends. Personally, I would probably go with a steady one, but I guess it depends on the client. 'Cause some clients are also, let's call them crazy, and they want to, all or nothing kind of performance from the media buyer.
yeah. I think it really comes down to it's a risk appetite the client might have, and then
Mm,
also too where the business is in terms of its maturity. Because some businesses
exactly.
that are more mature, they have like a very good understanding of their marketing mix and what they need to be doing. They
Yeah.
are looking for more predictability, whereas like, some of these earlier stage direct to consumer brands are like, we need to scale and scale and
Mm-hmm.
scale and whatever it takes. And
And they
those
don't know
people have a
what
much
works
higher risk.
outside. So
Yeah,
then it makes
yeah,
sense to put a media buyer who's like have those crazy ideas, test them quickly, and then see what works. And then from there on, maybe they can take a more steady approach.
yeah. Well, can we talk about the more creative media buyer too? Because one
Yes.
thing I've noticed, I mean, it's not even something I've noticed, it's the trend in the entire industry right now is going towards creative. I mean, it has been
Yeah.
for I would say about 2 years now. So it's heavily creative focused. What are you looking for a media buyer that's more, a creative first media buyer? And why is that more effective today?
Yeah. I mean, when you are more creative media buyer, like focus on the, let's say, creatives itself. Of course, you have to, like, we always ask how much they're involved in like brainstorming creatives, like coming up with ideas, researching. Some of them actually these days even like brief the creative teams in terms of like the angle that
Mm,
they want to come up with. So these are like the things that we look for. But I guess it also depends, on the person. Like a lot of, I mean, in my opinion, great media buyers, they know what kind of creatives work because,
mhm.
and they can be analytical too, not creative at all, but they usually know because if you're doing research, if you're keeping an eye on all of the competitors, you know what kind of works in the industry. And then when, let's say, creative team presents you with the ideas or final product, you look at it and you kind of suspect which one is going to work and which one is not. So, I mean, usually it's more about like what kind of experience they have with research angles, briefing, and so on. In my personal opinion, I think as a media buyer, you should always be involved. And I think many companies don't have the right setup for the creative team and the media buying team to come together and come up with those angles and ideas as a team. And in my opinion, it's critical. Like there has to be a time and a place where they come together and brainstorm and come up with the angles, because each department usually brings very different knowledge and different ideas, and those ideas are always worth testing. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
No, 100%. It actually surprises me because I've seen this with other agencies, especially when we've hired people from other agencies and they've siloed the creative
Yeah,
team and the media buying team. And then they
yeah,
just run on two separate tracks and they're not talking to each other at all. And then the
crazy.
media buyers will just get the creative from the creative team and they're like, all right, this is what we have to run this month. And
Yeah.
there's no feedback, there's no communication, and it's absurd to me, honestly, because
It is.
to be successful, you need to generate better and better creative. And the
Mm,
only way you can do that is have the media buyers speak to the creative team, talk about the performance, go through the data, talk about these insights in terms of why they think certain creative is performing better than others, and for them to have that kind of shared understanding so they can move forward. And if that's completely separated, you're never going to really move forward that well.
Yeah, 100%. The agency I was part of at the start of my career, as an agency, we had the reputation of being extremely good at creatives, and that was 2018. So even
Hmm.
back then, the creatives were important. Maybe nobody talked about it as much, but creatives were always important. And one of the reasons why we were so good at producing high performing creatives is because the media buyers and the creative team, so editors and graphic designers, they would always have regular, I think it was weekly sprints, so it was elements of agile. So there would be like weekly sprints where everyone would come to the meeting prepared with ideas of what we can test in the next week. We would brainstorm, discuss them, and then choose which ones we're gonna go ahead. Then the production team would prepare them, and then the media buyers would test. But basically every single member in the team had to come up with ideas, because every idea can, you never know which idea is going to win. So it makes sense that everyone contributes based on their job specifics.
Yep, makes complete sense. Last question for you.
Okay.
Where do you look for media buyers? And I guess it's like, platforms, but also too like location.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's important to advertise because sometimes you do get great people through advertising. So when it comes to advertising, LinkedIn is probably an amazing place. And if you spend a bit more time on LinkedIn, you will see that great media buyers, they spend also quite a bit of time like talking about themselves, like building a personal brand. So LinkedIn is a great place to find awesome people. Majority of the good media buyers that we hire actually come through headhunting. So, and this is the time-consuming recruitment strategy, because you actually have to go out there and look for those people yourself, and then you have to like outreach them and try to win them over. So, headhunting is probably the best thing you can do. And except for junior positions, I guess headhunting is the strategy for majority of the roles these days. Like you have to go out there and look for people, unless your requirements are not as high, and maybe the people that apply can be good fit too. And then another thing that I think is worth exploring is tapping into your own network. So many times I see that companies start hiring before they even ask around if anyone knows anyone. Like look at
Hmm.
your team. If you have a star, like an A-star media buyer, check in with them and see if they have someone to recommend, because I like to say A players usually like to work with A players. So if you have an A player on your team, check in with them. Maybe in the previous company they had someone. So your network, headhunting, and then some ads.
Yeah, it's a really good point about, it's about A players wanting to work with A players too. I found it's if someone's really good,
Yeah,
their network are also people who are really good. And then also too, they have a pretty high bar standard in,
exactly.
you know, how they judge other people, for lack of a
Yeah.
better way of saying that. But,
Yep.
they're gonna want to get other people like them who are really good to work with them, because they don't want to go get somebody who is gonna cause problems for them basically. And it's
Yeah.
gonna be a difficult working relationship. And I also found too, it is somewhat dependent on that person's personality too. But
Mm,
ideally, if you have a good A player that has like an open mindset that really likes collaborating with other good people, they're always going to go recommend other good people. The only thing I
yeah.
found, which is a little interesting, is people that have some level of insecurity.
Mm,
Sometimes, especially if they're hiring people to work for themselves, they typically hire people a little worse. And I think someone told me this. It was like sevens hire fives and like eights hire tens. Maybe that's not right. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but if
mhm,
score 1 out of 10, if someone's like a hard seven, they're gonna hire people that are no, it's like five hire twos, and then I think
yeah,
like eight hire tens or something. But if someone's like not that great,
mhm,
they're gonna hire people who are worse than them because it makes them look better, and also
yeah,
they feel like they can kind of control that person better. But if someone's really good and wants to do better, they actually try to hire people who are even better than them in order
mhm,
to just really amplify what's going on. So
yeah. I mean, I would say always hire someone better than yourself because
yeah,
I mean, first of all, you will achieve much more and you'll be more successful. But second of all, that will also reflect on you and you will build a great reputation as a person who's able to build amazing teams. So I would say always hire people better than yourself. It just makes
well,
so
it's
much
funny
sense.
too. I mean, you know this. I mean, as a business owner, if you're not hiring someone who's better than you, you're just adding more headache.
Yes,
You know?
exactly. You're adding more work for yourself. It's
Yeah,
insane. And at some point, you will
yeah.
still end up firing them and looking for a replacement. So yeah, 100%. Always hire someone better. Always doesn't matter in which industry and which role, but always look for someone who's more experienced, more skilled, and can add great value instantly.
Yeah. One last part of that question was location. So how do you do your hiring based on location? Because one great thing about Prosana is you source people from Europe, and for US companies that's really good sometimes because you can
Yeah,
find great talent. And I mean it sounds bad, but potentially lower costs because, at least like I know for sure in the UK there's free healthcare, and it's
yeah.
just salaries aren't as high because there's great benefits
Um,
you know people have outside of in the US you have to pay for everything basically. So generally there's a little bit of inflation in salaries. But yeah, how do you kind of think about hiring based on location too? And what
mm,
does that look like for digital marketing agencies and D2C
yeah.
brands too?
So we actually, I mean, a lot of the agencies and the e-com brands that we work with do hire remote. The question is where
Yeah.
remote. If a client is from the States, they sometimes just want to hire talent from the States remotely, but from the States. And then if they want to hire from Europe, that's great as well. I think the reasons why they want to go outside the country make sense because of the talent being equally, let's say, equally experienced at a bit of a lower cost. So when it comes to hiring, let's say, media buyers internationally, we do have certain regions that we target. For example, I will tell you like one country in Europe that's really good for media buyers, and that's Serbia.
Mm.
Serbians have great talent. And I'm not going to say they are like extremely cheap because they are not, especially if they have like international experience. Their prices are quite high, but compared to US talent prices, it's still much lower.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think how we hire, I mean, we just advertise in different countries and see, who come back. We also build lists from targeting people from those different countries. So there's no magic here. It's a lot of hard work that goes into it to find those people. Because when you're targeting broad, you have to put in a lot of work. It's the same with advertising. You're targeting broad, you have to spend more money. So we
Yeah.
have to spend more time.
Yeah. Makes sense. Well, awesome. That's all the questions I had for you. Is there anything else you want to highlight? I mean, you want to speak quickly too about Persona and what you guys do in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, yeah. So at Prosana, we help marketing agencies and e-com brands hire the best talent, and we also help build lean operations. We've been doing for this for quite some time. All of the team members actually come from an agency and e-commerce background, which means we understand the industry in and out. And then we stand for building excellent teams, because when you have excellent teams and consisting of true A players, the business is successful, and then the people feel fulfilled doing that responsibility given to them. So yeah, basically this is what we do. And if anyone listening is interested, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I guess my email won't be mentioned anywhere, but can drop me a message on LinkedIn and we can chat. And sometimes, just chatting can, answer a lot of questions for you, be able to recruit yourself. So just connecting, networking, I think would be beneficial.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining. I thought this was a great conversation. And it's something that a lot of people are struggling with, especially hiring media buyers.
I agree. I think we will be able to talk about other roles in the future as well, like creative strategists, right? Those are tough ones.
For sure. That's another big one. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Hal, for having me. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining.